All right, YouTube, you probably saw, of course, in California, Trump held a rally last night, and the protesters got boisterous. They got high energy, as I guess, the salons of the world would term it. In reality, they rioted. Some of them did anyway. A lot of them were just there to picket, which, that's fine. You can, of course, picket if you want to. Others were trying to block traffic, which is not exactly an expression of free speech so much as an inhibition of other people's freedom of movement. You see, you gotta use the non-aggression principle. You can protest all day if you want to, but if you're impeding others, attacking other people, vandalizing things, that's not a legitimate form of protest. Unless it's aimed at an authoritarian government and you're trying to overthrow it as part of a legitimate revolution, that just becomes a bunch of nonsense. Unfortunately, what we saw were protesters vandalizing, smashing cars, and windows, looting, as often happens in an urban setting when you have a protest. Because you've got people that show up and they use the fact that the police are distracted, and there are a lot of people milling about to do damage to local storefronts and so forth. Now, I would ask this: does anybody in their right mind really think that some randomly selected civilian who just happens to be in the area is a legitimate target of your grievances against Donald Trump? I would hope that the answer is no. There were people waving Mexican flags, which I thought was funny. See, the protesters are clueless. They don't seem to understand that by acting in such a manner, by waving the Mexican flag and saying, Trump is an idiot, Trump is a stooge, let's go smash a police car, they don't seem to understand that that essentially legitimizes the central core of what Donald Trump has been saying for the last year. They are too stupid to understand that this is the case. It doesn't even matter, by the way, if you're in the left, if you're like some fucking anarcho punk or something, and you think Donald Trump is the devil or a boogeyman or something. Okay, that's fine, but you just give legitimacy to his cause, really, when you do such a thing. And I think this just shows the stupidity of those who live in a sort of bubble. They don't like to be challenged about their views. They hold the belief that their views are objective, so anyone who questions them is like a horrible xenophobic racist or something, or an anti-Semite, or mansplaining, and they're chauvinistic. The problem with that is that most people in the population do not live in your supposedly objective bubble of social justice warrior mentality. And when they see on TV a bunch of people waving Mexican flags and then a bunch of looting and police car smashing going on, they conflate your protest with looters, with criminal activity, and then they listen to Trump all that much more, and it gives him more attention, quite frankly. I find this funny. It's almost like these groups, they're just so stupid that they almost self-sabotage. They're almost suicidal. We've seen this before. If you had a gang, if you had a bunch of Christians, for instance, protesting against gay rights or something, and then you see on the news that a bunch of Christians waving like crosses around or are smashing up a storefront that's owned by a gay person, naturally that's going to move the public sentiment away from their cause and towards the cause of gay rights. This is what happened during the civil rights era, by the way. A lot of people were ambivalent. They felt that the civil rights struggle was far away. It was sort of detached from them. They weren't part of it. They didn't really see a problem. They said, well, just fucking get over it. It's just segregation. You're separate, but I mean, you're fucking equal. So where's the fucking problem? All of a sudden they see black marchers and young white college students in many cases getting dogs sicked on them, getting sprayed down with water hoses. You see little kids getting shot across the road by water hoses. You see people getting beaten down by all of these police barking orders at them. People getting obviously abused in a very tyrannical manner. And then public sentiment, when that was televised, that's when civil rights actually took off and became a mainstream movement that had more support than just in states with segregation and among sort of the academic, the college students and so forth, because it's public image. The media couldn't ignore it. The media wanted a juicy story. Attention was drawn to it. The same is true of Trump. He knows how to use this effect. He'll hold a rally in a place where he knows there will be protesters. Those protesters are very likely to go out and loot and vandalize. Not all of them, but at least some of them. That's what gets the media attention, because that violence, the burning police car and the smashed up storefront and the Trump fan that gets their head smashed in with a brick, those make better news items than, oh, there was a protest here. Here's some people standing around chanting Trump is stupid or something like that. It's elementary. It's like 001 level propaganda here. And it's not, I don't even think that Trump really realizes the effect of this and how much of an impact it even has. I think even he's oblivious to the fact that he gets so much free press from specifically this sort of thing. You look at what happened in Chicago. Of course, the protesters came and were rowdy, and he cancels his rally. He trades a few tens of thousands of people whose minds he can change, most of whom were already his fans in Chicago. He traded that for hundreds of thousands of people around the region voting for him out of spite for protesters that they saw as being disrespectful, criminal, looting, vandalizing, and so forth. I think these protesters are clueless. If you want to sit there waving the Mexican flag as well, again, you've got to realize Trump is currently vying for the nomination of the Republican Party. The average Republican, whether it's a Cruz fan, a Kasich fan, or a Trump fan, doesn't like the idea of a bunch of protesters waving Mexican flags, blocking traffic, and then going off to loot a storefront. Really, it's going to amalgamate more support behind his message. I wouldn't be surprised if, like Chicago, this really moves the barometer in his favor, because we never see this happen at a Cruz rally. Now, Cruz is suggesting things that are far more off-kilter and far more insane than anything Trump has ever dreamed up in his wildest of dreams. And yet there's not a single protest at a Cruz rally. Most of the time you don't even know his rallies are happening because it's like a fucking dozen people, because nobody gives a shit about Cruz. Kasich, his average rally is he sits down and eats a plate of food while people ask him random questions, honestly. Trump is the only one on the Republican side who has the presence to do this. Even Sanders' campaign is dying. Hillary's campaign, yeah, she draws large crowds. Most of the people are fucking bored. They're like half asleep when she's speaking, because they'd rather sleep because she's so shrill. They can't stand her tone of voice. They can't stand her message. They realize she's dishonest and pandering. They're just sort of a captive audience of bored Democrats who aren't yet Republicans, because they're still, maybe the Democratic Party will get better in the general election. Most of them will be let down. They'll end up not voting at all, which is why the Democrats this time around are screwed. Why, by the way, let me ask you a little bit of a rhetorical question, and I'm sure you know the answer. Why do you think that in this election out of all, a person whose message isn't really that far out of step with the older guard of the Republicans, which is Trump, why do you think he's facing so much pressure from opponents who are clearly losing, who are desperate to get to a brokered convention even though they stress party loyalty? It's because they know the Democrats are basically doomed during this election. Hillary isn't drawing enough people in to really win a general election. They know the Republicans have a huge advantage going into the general election, so they all want to be the one coronated to run against her. That's why there were so many obviously unqualified oddballs running to begin with. They thought, well, I might have 1/1,000,000% chance, but if I can get that chance at all, I'm going to take it, because this is the possible way to become the president of the United States in an election that's going to go heavily against the left. That's what you see right now. But these protesters aren't doing themselves any favors by waving the Mexican flag. That might be okay, like for Southern California sort of area, or Central California or something, somewhere nearer to the border. The rest of the country watches in astonishment, though, as these people who talk about Trump being violent are then becoming violent themselves. I find it additionally funny. What you see, for instance, on Salon today is, it was just a matter of time before another Trump rally became violent. You don't seem to understand. The only people who were being violent here were protesters who were dead set against Trump. There were a bunch of college-age kids and Latino nationalists maybe, or something like that, people that are concerned about Trump's message. But often, if you ask these people specifically why they don't like Trump, they can't even answer you. They say, well, he's a Nazi, he's a bigot. You say, what did he say that's so bigoted? Well, he wants to build a wall. You point out that has nothing to do with race at all, and they sputter and they're astonished and they don't know exactly what's going on. And something in their mind refuses to click, and then they go back to their DNC talking points. It's a problem, and this has been a problem also before on the right. You ask people, for instance, well, what makes Bill Clinton a pinko commie liberal, like you say that he is? What makes him, this horrible redistributionist, tax and spend liberal? And a lot of them wouldn't be able to, at the time, answer you either. The answer is because he wasn't. Ultimately, he was just burger-eating neocon who didn't really do much of anything other than fuck up our gun laws and sign NAFTA, honestly, his worst mistake of all. That and the assault rifle ban that shot crime through the roof in urban areas, and I would argue the tough on crime thing that fucking his wife wants to keep going with, even though it's an abysmal failure. Now, these protesters don't appear to understand that the image presented on TV to the older Republicans and online to all the younger Republicans, as well as to independents, what they see right now is a bunch of violent looters and opportunists and hypocrites waving Mexican flags and going to beat people up and smash police cars. That many of them probably weren't even aware. Unless they were Trump fans, they probably didn't even know specifically he was holding a rally there yesterday. But now they know, and now they're going to go and they're going to watch that rally. They're going to see what Trump has to say, and they're going to contrast that with the protests that turned violent. Now, this is unfortunate. Now, there is one unfortunate thing. Protesters, there are two different groups of people that are at these protests. The first is much larger, and those are people who they have what they consider a legitimate grievance. They go out and they picket, they protest, they're doing it lawfully, there's no problem there. But then there's a smaller element that are opportunists that are going there specifically to raise hell. They want to have a fight. They want to beat somebody up. They want to loot a storefront. They want to set fire to a police car or something. They inevitably show up. It's like Black Bloc, these retarded Marxist anarchists that are all over Europe. They'll show up at a protest that's perfectly legitimate, like the anti-globalist protests that you see like that, like G20 or whatever, and you have protesters there. That's fine. But then Black Bloc shows up and all they want to do is throw bricks and Molotov cocktails. And they inevitably do. And then the protesters get beaten down by the police even though they weren't the ones causing a problem. I don't have a problem with people protesting Trump's message. That's your free speech, free expression. Do what the fuck you want. But when people begin blocking traffic and then throwing the bricks and stuff, that's when it becomes a problem. Unfortunately, whether the protesters in any case are right or wrong, I think that a lot of the grievances of these specific protesters are misguided. They have the right to protest even if they're complete idiots. Whether a protest is guided by reason or whether it's sort of just an emotional appeal to nonsense, as some of these protests have been, they then get mistreated by the police, and there's no real grievance that they can lodge with the public that's going to stick because people have already made their minds up looking at the footage of this specific looting going on. And so they say, well, I don't feel sorry for you. Even if it was someone who wasn't participating in that, did get hit with pepper spray or get beaten over the head with a riot baton. They no longer, it's generally felt they no longer have a legitimate grievance against top-heavy authoritarian police action, specifically because they happen to be there at the time. Even if they're a bystander, they're not even necessarily a protester. We saw in Ferguson, homeowners whose lawns had been fucked up and whose homes had been damaged by some of these police actions at various times, even though they weren't themselves participating in any protest at all. They were just sitting there watching it and getting dragged into it over time. And I said that at the time that, the looters and so forth, they were largely ignored by the police. The police maintained a heavy presence around people who were literally just standing around holding signs. And then they went off. They sent a handful of plainclothes cops to go chase down the rioters and looters, while the most heavily armed officers were just sitting there blocking off the actual peaceful protest. I thought it was very funny. I think perhaps they should rethink their strategies, but that doesn't have anything to do with what the average person in the public sees here. Even a lot of Democrats, they're going to look at this and they're going to say, well, I don't see any Trump fans looting and burning up police cars. I don't see them randomly assaulting protesters. All I see here are a bunch of self-professed, liberals or whatever, beating down Trump fans and attacking the police. And they're going to say, that doesn't sound like the kind of image I want representing my views. Maybe I'll think about becoming an independent now. And it happens. It happened in Chicago. Look at what happened in Illinois when they went to vote. You can't ignore that facet of the race, really. The fact that these protests are prevalent at Trump's venues and they're not prevalent anywhere else. You have a handful of people protesting maybe outside Cruz HQ or a Bernie Sanders rally where they've got a effigy of Marx that they're burning or something like that. Ultimately, though, it's pretty humdrum. It's pretty boring. And the fact that these people have boring messages is why they don't get as much media coverage. It's kind of funny. It's like what Anderson Cooper was ranting about with Ted Cruz. Oh, we had an invitation out for him to him for months to come on our show, and he never wanted to come on until the town hall, and then complained, of course, about getting less media coverage. But these protesters have really screwed up. If anything is going to move California towards voting for Trump, it's something like this. I mean, he keeps getting these free gifts from people who hate him on some deep psychological level. They don't realize they're perhaps the greatest advocates for Trump's ideology of anybody in the country right now. I would say the same about all these foreign leaders who say, well, we're confused by Trump. We don't understand why Americans take him seriously. Well, why would we take Europe seriously? Europe's like falling apart right now. That's kind of the fucking point. So these protesters in Costa Mesa really attacking the police and so forth, they didn't do themselves any favors. And it's pretty funny to watch the footage because it's just a clusterfuck of stupidity. That's about all. Peace out.